in this section of the conversation, I particularly wanted to talk about cultural appropriation and talk about what cultural appropriation is. It gets tossed around here and there in conversation, so I want it to be pretty concrete in this conversation. So for the purposes of this conversation, and you guys can, tell me how you feel about this definition, but this is kind of what I crafted. It's essentially when one culture, particularly a dominant culture, adopts or borrows or just straight up takes an element of another culture, particularly a minority culture. And it's not inherently a bad thing, I think, because of where we are now in the world, because of technology and the media. We're very globally connected, right? And we're exposed to a lot more than people were exposed, years before us. So we know we can watch a Holi festival taking place in Kolkata, or we can watch, a haka taking place in New Zealand. And so we see these things and we can appreciate them. Where it becomes an issue or a matter of cultural appropriation is when we see those things and we begin to incorporate them into our culture without being mindful of what it means. And what you just said about the headdress is exactly, I was going to talk about that actually, because I'm particularly reminded of Coachella. Mm-hmm. And all the cool cats and kittens want to, go to Coachella and dress up, and they'll, don one of these headdresses or something of that nature, and they'll be completely, it has nothing to do with Coachella, at all. And they're, you're donning this headdress, and as you just said, that has to be earned, and it's something that's sacred to your people. And so when we're thinking about cultural appropriation, and in particular and how it weaves into our historical research and then the presentation of that research, super important on how we go about doing that. We don't want to appropriate anyone's culture while trying to tell their story. We have to go do that respectfully. So I guess, Candra, for this, can you expand on that more? Why does it matter how stories are told and who tells the stories?
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate you also kind of pairing and talking about cultural appreciation and bringing up the word respect, because I think one of the things that is really important is when you talk about, like, why does it matter how the stories are told? We want to make sure that we're telling any stories with respect. And I think that part of demonstrating respect and part of demonstrating appreciation for someone's culture, someone's society, is having done your research and having and bringing knowledge to what it is that you're going to be talking about, for what it is that you're going to be asking about. I think it's also important to have an awareness about you, and an awareness of not only the historical context and content that you want to talk about, but an awareness of the time that we're living in, and aware of how what you are going to be portraying could also be received, or how it could impact others that are your viewers, or who are experiencing particularly your performance. And in that way, I think we have to be mindful that there's a dynamic at play. There's a historic dynamic at play that's born out of all of the many decades and centuries of what we all know has happened here in our country. And it is important that we are aware that the awareness, right, thinking that when if a white student or white person is playing a person of color, that there's a dynamic built into that, and it's a dynamic that often can be born out of that history of oppression. And so I think just having that awareness and understanding that exists, and that it's not something that necessarily we created, because of who we are and how we lived, but it's something that is a part of this society and this history that has happened within this country. And that awareness that is a part of that choice, if you choose to make that, is a really important thing, I think, to consider. And it then kind of takes you back into that being thoughtful about your choices and respecting the culture and the stories that you're telling and the people that you're talking about, and doing your research again, and then coming back and cycling back around to, is that a choice that I need to make in order to have this theater be a tool to get this message across. I think, you know, having that continuous loop and that awareness being a part of that loop